Welcome to Manager Tools. Is this normal? Episode 3, Part 2. This cast answers these questions. Is it normal to have open political discussions at work? Is it normal to be asked to join a political action committee as an executive? Well, if you want answers to these questions and more, keep listening. Here we go, folks.
Many of the folks who follow our guidance rave about how actionable the guidance is. The podcasts are not where the action stops, however. Join us at one of our upcoming public conference events, and you'll leave with a full-on game plan for the next 10 months of your managerial life. Looking for the answers for both the what and how of successful management? Visit us at manager-tools.com/training and register for an upcoming event today.
So let's talk about the other situation that I didn't mention, but ought to be obvious. If a manager can't talk about politics with their directs or with a peer, that eliminates political discussions for everybody in the company, but individual contributors, right? You might say, well, I'm an individual. I don't speak for the company. I should be able to. But guys, think about it for a minute. The kind of organizational norm you're suggesting that individual contributors talk about politics, but managers can't, is virtually impossible to maintain or police or even educate employees about. So employees, individual contributors, are also encouraged through cultural norms to avoid sustained political discussions. Now, if you joined a company, if you're relatively new to the professional workplace and you came out of college where political discussions would be encouraged, that's good. It's part of learning that you talk to other people about what they think. And if you respect somebody and they have different views than you keep your mind open to why they think what they think. Hopefully, when you respect other people, you don't immediately lose respect for them just because they have one political view differently than you. Although I think that's what the media would like us to believe about the state of relationships in the world today. Probably more so. To be fair, guys, we try to speak generally about management, but I think that's certainly a function of where Mike and I live in the United States. But if employees can't talk about it, and if managers cannot talk about it, well, you've got a cultural norm, right, for the organization. If you're just joining and you think it's okay to talk about politics at work, one of the problems is you make a political comment to a colleague. They don't understand that norms, as opposed to policies or procedures or rules, are communicated by individual conversations where people are aware of the response they get from other people and learn through thousands of small interactions. Hey, I got better responses when I didn't say this, less good responses when I did say this. I'm going to do things that are, that I don't say that because I want good relationships with the people around me. They may not know. And in fact, what often happens is when one person makes a comment about politics that is in disagreement with somebody else's, because they don't know, either side knows that it's a norm. One person, the person who's receiving that, knows that person shouldn't do it. But they don't know it's a norm as opposed to a rule or a policy. And so they go to their boss and they say, look, I'm really sorry. One of my colleagues just said something about politics. I think the rule around here is we don't talk about politics. You need to talk to him. And actually, the boss would probably say, actually, no, the organization, look, I'm happy to do it. But actually, the norm, the way norms get enforced is not that we enforce them. We educate people about them. And so the next time he does, you should say to him, hey, by the way, you probably don't know that. Thanks for sharing that, if you can stomach saying that. If you focus on the medium and not the message, you should be able to say that. But you should say, hey, there's an unwritten rule here. It'd be even better if you said norm. The norm around here is we don't talk about politics. This is one of those things. This is one of those organizations where you don't. Now, some people say, I don't want to have to do that. I don't think that's fair. I'm uncomfortable. And I'll say what I say all the time. You don't get paid to be comfortable. You get paid to be effective. And if you're looking for comfort, don't try to become a professional.
Yeah. Just shun them.
Because you're going to be asked. Yeah.
That's it.
Just shun them. Yeah. Until you're in a meeting with them in an hour and you're going to have to listen to their ideas. And by the way, when somebody shares a political
which is the issue, right? that is the piece that people don't understand. It's like, if you engage in political discussion, there are some people who you'll have less of a relationship. It will impact your ability to talk about work.
Yes, exactly. So in my example, neither one knows it's a norm, but one person knows it's not done. And if they don't think about it being a norm, in fact, they secretly hope that the company has codified it into a rule so that person can now be a rule breaker, that eliminates my responsibility to educate them, because when it comes to norms, it's about small bits of education along the way. That's how culture propagates. I'd go to the boss and say, hey, they said something. Oh, well, okay, that's unfortunate. Did you tell them that's not what we do here? Well, I don't know. I'm not in charge. I don't make the rules. And the manager hopefully will say, actually, it's not a rule. It's a norm. We wouldn't want to codify that rule because now we have to adjudicate every situation against the rule. And now we spend management time figuring out a rule for something that it'd be way better to leave it as a norm. And that means you talking to them. If you don't want to talk to them, that's fine. I'll mention it to them. You should know. They'll assume it came from you, and that will damage the relationship as well. You're much better off talking to them directly and say, hey, yeah. So all of that is dumb. Now, I think there are people listening right now that say, well, that's easy. Let's get rid of the norm. We should be able to talk about politics at work. Here's the problem, guys. The reason this is a norm is we tried that hundreds of years ago, and we discovered that, organizations discovered that it doesn't work. Originally, there was a line in society that you didn't talk about politics, and that crept into the workplace. And then people started talking about politics with their trusted colleagues. And again, they discovered that really doesn't work. And so now professionally, companies generally don't do it. Now, look, this is all not to suggest, guys, that you can't make a political comment among friends occasionally at work. You can roll your eyes about something a politician does. But much more than that, a one-off comment once a quarter or something is risky. And particularly in today's politically charged media world, and please understand the media shares with you things that are juicy and salacious and dramatic and tension-filled and drama-filled and conflict-filled, because it's not news when a plane takes off and lands on time and safely. And it makes it more like news if they characterize it rather than just telling you what they say. I've had a lot of situations lately where I read the news and first the headline is way over the top, and then the characterization, the adverbs and adjectives that the writer uses are, I would say, tendentious and provocative. But when you actually read the comments, it's like, no, he really didn't say that. And if you assume positive intent, it's like, no, there's no story there. But believe me, reporters who need to file column inches will make a story out of it, particularly if there's a link and they can claim that, hey, look, my story created 17,000 clicks. That's a good thing. But look, in today's politically charged media world, a colleague with whom you work may well become less of a professional ally if they were to discover your politics differed from theirs. Now, look, guys, more generally, since we're talking about norms coming into the workplace from society, the general prohibition about talking about sex or politics or religion is not just old-fashioned stuffy etiquette practiced by wealthy elites, right? It's a rule of thumb evolved through the millions of interactions that occur in society. We have learned over time that discussion of these topics often lead to less than ideal professional and business outcomes, and so we respect the avoidance of these topics in our discourse out of self-interest. Okay? We are not just bowing to the organization. We are respecting that when you come together with others, and there are many, many viewpoints, there are cultural norms that rise up that are created over time in order to help the organization propagate. And if you're wanting to talk about politics, you're essentially saying, I want to assert my individuality over the organization. And organizations generally don't mind that in very small bits, a la the once a quarter mention of a political eye roll. But much more than that, it's probably not in your best interest professionally. And look, avoiding discussing politics at work, we can easily justify it with a reminder about a simple premise. The second most important factor in career success is relationships after results. Politics is personal enough and charged with polarity enough that other topics are better choices for you professionally. Politics is at the risky end of the topics of conversation scale. Okay? Americans joke that all the Brits talk about is the weather. Part of that is because the weather's interesting in Britain, more so than, say, Arizona, except during the monsoon season. But it's easier to talk about the weather. Now, that may not be appealing to you, and maybe if you really want to talk about politics at work, you should make that one of the questions you ask after you get an offer from the company. Hey, are political discussions okay here at work? And find a company that says yes. I think if you did that and you asked people, they would say, no, we don't, and they would be surprised by the question because 99% of companies say, no, we don't do that. Okay. Look, if a colleague of yours were on a performance improvement plan, a PIP, because of poor performance with his boss, you wouldn't bring that up in a conversation with other people. It may actually be known to every individual in the conversation. They couldn't not know it. That person who's on the PIP has shared it with every person. But there is a difference between everyone knowing it and one of you suggesting we all talk about it.
Yeah. Hey, Joe, how's that PIP going? Just making conversation.
Yeah. There are topics that are more appropriate and more professional than that. Now, look, recently, the reason I decided to write this cast now, it's been on my list for a long time, there's been an uptick in political discussions in workplaces. Google employees recently made news for staging a walkout regarding the company's stance and actions regarding sexual harassment. And a walkout is generally a political thing or a non-organizational thing, unless we're talking about unions, for which there are an entirely different set of rules and norms and laws about unions. Again, that's not so much a political statement. I'm not suggesting that the walkout was a political statement, as it is the use of a political tool, a public display, to lobby for organizational change. Google, and I mentioned Google because if Google sneezes, it seems like the news thinks we have a flu. Everything they do is interesting to people. They made the news because they've hosted political speakers on its campus. And the debates that have occurred, the internecine debates that have occurred, and the turbulence that came within the wake of people canceling and people saying, I can't believe you're inviting that speaker. Whereas Google before that was basically saying, if you want to talk about politics, you can talk about politics all you want. Google is now having to issue official guidance regarding the discussions. They ban certain words and behaviors. These are now rules that Google executives have to spend time crafting to overcome the problems associated with their lack of respect for the organizational history that caused the cultural norm of not talking about politics to be a well-regarded norm that organizations ought to generally stick to. They've admitted that allowing employees to engage in political speech at work at Google are adversely affecting that employee's productivity. They've said it. And if we're affecting employee productivity, then we're affecting corporate productivity. And what do we know about productivity? What's the word that manager tools associate with productivity all the time? Profitability. Now, look, we share those newsworthy changes for two reasons. First, remember, guys, it's news not because everyone is doing it, talking about politics at work with organizational approval. It's because almost no one is, okay? In fact, I'm sure somebody at the Journal said, can you believe this? Google's allowing political speech at work. They're actually making corporate resources available for it. The media are not covering this potentially evolving change in the workplace because it's divisive, though apparently it appears to be at Google. They are covering it because it's rare. We don't recommend you start talking about politics at work just because a trend-setting company like Google is leading the way. I'll tell you another funny story about Google. True story. A lot of people focus on Google. I'll actually mention two things. If you really want to know how Google manages, Google used to be a managerless company. Google the phrase Project Oxygen, and you'll find that they manage by using one-on-ones and feedback and coaching and delegation. Okay. Having a relationship with your people and building trust is the first thing they teach. Oh, listen to that. The second thing is, you would think, oh, Google tech company, Silicon Valley, everybody's on their laptops all the time. That's a cool thing. Every technical person in your company, they're always taking notes on laptops. They like their laptops. Their laptops go with them everywhere. There are pictures of young people at home watching TV with their significant other on their laptops and so on. But Google has a policy, no laptops in meetings. No laptops. We're here and you're not going to be doing email. The assumption, of course, is you're using the laptop for something other than note-taking, which, of course, people are. And there's a story of the Google executive who new person comes in, sits down, opens up his laptop in a meeting, and the guy says, hey, by the way, it's kind of a rule of Google. We don't use laptops in meetings. And the kid says, well, that's the way I take notes. So I'm going to go ahead and do it. Again, we have this conflict between what the organizational norms, rules, policies, procedures are, and what the individual wants. And the more senior person goes, no, really, it's a pretty serious thing. The CEO of the company says you can't do that. And the kid goes, well, he's not here. And of course, as you might know, the guy on the other side of the kid is Eric Schmidt, CEO of Google. And he says to the kid, yes, I am, and closes the laptop. So if you're thinking that all companies in Silicon Valley are alike, that, Google's a techie company, so they do things this way. No, you probably really don't know. And if you want to manage the way Google manages, manage the way we teach. And if you want to run meetings the way Google runs meetings, no laptops. Okay. This other point I want to make is that Google's struggle with this issue, because they don't want to be talking about this, they want to be serving customers. Their struggle is a reminder of the value of the norm of avoiding politics at work. It isn't easy to change a norm or a cultural adaptation with organizational rules. The norm is limited. It's surprisingly supple in some cases. It's adjusted by individuals based on context and setting, based on their understanding of the general principles behind the norm. Rules, on the other hand, tend to be specific and limited, not flexible enough to address the idiosyncrasies, all of the subtle idiosyncrasies of human life and habits and communication. That's why it's a norm. And that's why we say, don't talk about politics at work.
Okay, so that was our first major point or bullet. Our second one was talk about executive life and
I love this
political action committees, which is, it's generally something you don't see until you become an executive. That's not always true, but generally speaking, that's when you see it.
Yeah. So the question is, again, is it normal to be asked to join a political action committee, which may have been created by the company or is supported by the company as part of an industry effort, generally around, in 99.9% of the cases, I've never heard of this not being true, of a political action committee designed to lobby the government for the benefit of the industry or the company and its business? And the answer is, it is normal to be asked to join a PAC once one reaches certain executive levels in many companies. Not all, but in many companies. If you get asked, it's because you're not being asked because you're part of some secret society. Only you share the values of the founders, and all of your other VP buddies didn't get asked. No, everybody else got asked when they got that promotion at that level.
Yeah, I think there's an assumption that once you reach executive level, that your personal values are aligned with those of the company. For example, if you're an anti-smoker, you're probably not working for a cigarette company, right? I mean,
yeah, I think that's true. I don't think that's the reason why companies do this. I think companies do this because if you're an executive, you're responsible for the long-term organizational health of the company. And part of the long-term organizational health of the company is working within the bounds of a society, an economy, a political framework that politicians have influence over. Government lobbying, political lobbying, when there are laws that could be passed that benefit one or the other. I've been going back and forth to Washington for nearly 30 years, and I am astounded that we still hear stories about some very powerful senator or representative choose your poison in other countries. And there's a law that says this tax law says this, but there's an interesting carve out that, it doesn't apply to dairy companies who sell yogurt that is non-pasteurized. I'm making that up, guys. And you come to find out that the person in charge of the finance committee who writes those laws, their single biggest donor is some company that I think that's, in my opinion, deleterious to the process, the citizen's role of being engaged in political discourse and believing in politics being comprising effective, smart, ethical people making good decisions for the benefit of the polity.
As opposed to rent seeking, right?
Yeah, rent seeking, yeah. So again, some companies do this, some companies don't. Some companies lobby the government differently. They donate to an industry coalition, or they get involved in the Chamber of Commerce, or even through spokespersons that could be an exec that's paid by the company or an external one, directly or indirectly, okay? But in probably a noticeable plurality of large companies, and I'm talking about Fortune, let's just say Fortune 5,000 executives. I said plurality. I didn't say majority. I didn't say all. So don't assume this definitely will happen to you. And if you think of yourself as an executive at a 3-person company, you're not an executive the way I think of it in terms of the discussion we're having here. And I will say, I'm reading a book right now called The CEO Next Door. And in the book, I think the datum that they drop is that there are 6 million CEOs in America. Now, I need to dig into the data a little bit more, but I immediately have a problem with that because I think there are 12-person companies whose owner and president is a CEO. And so therefore that person was surveyed and therefore they are being considered, their vote counts the same as, the CEO of Apple. To me, that's a little misleading. I think when people in the normal vernacular say CEO, what they mean is a publicly known or at least locally publicly known person who is managing a $500 million business or maybe even $100 million business. But I would be surprised. I could be totally wrong. And feel free to email me and say, Mark, you were totally wrong. And I'll retract it later. But I don't think if you take the number of $100 million companies, total gross revenue in America, that there are 6 million of them, right? Otherwise, you could say Mike or I are a CEO, but we're not stupid enough to call ourselves that. Anyway, in a plurality of companies, executives are expected to join a specific PAC, usually created by the company so the company can control it, but sometimes an industry-created PAC or a coalition of companies created PAC. The PAC, typically, Political Action Committee, PAC, PAC, typically is a way for the company to increase the company's ability to raise money. Executives are expected to donate to the PAC. The PAC then uses that money to pay for advertising, events, offices, lobbyists, people to attempt to influence the political process for the benefit of the organization. All of this activity is disclosed, or certainly it's supposed to be. Guys, just to be clear, this is not to say that when you think you've achieved an executive level promotion that you used to know the top 40 people in your company, I'm making this up, 40, and you are now in a role of a guy that used to be in this role that you thought of as being in the leadership of the company, and you're now not in that role. That if you're now in that role and you didn't get invited to join a PAC, that's somehow a bad sign. It's entirely possible your company doesn't have one, doesn't support one, doesn't encourage one. And that's a completely legitimate way to do business. But what would happen if you were to decline to join or make donations to a PAC? Again, PACs generally don't support a particular person because of the person. Much more often, they're interested in lobbying for policy changes, but policy changes, law changes are made by people. And so they may support a change in law, and that may mean donating to somebody who's in favor of that law. Okay. But we really don't know what would happen if you decided to say no, because we've never heard of it happening. It might be reasonable to assume that that in itself is an indication of some perception of repercussions among people for a declination. I would say it's far more likely that people think, wow, I've arrived. I'm part of the executive pack of this company. Of course I'll donate. Again, we're unaware of somebody declining because we've never heard from someone who has done so. We have heard from executives with ties to companies and PACs who say there could be no pressure put on somebody to join because that would be coercion of political speech. And that's probably so. But that wouldn't rule out some sort of eyebrow raising that would occur as a result of a well-intentioned declination of the offer. We think that could happen, as many executive job evaluations turn on all kinds of subtle and nuanced evaluations of when there are not hard results to go by. We have never heard of it happening, and we're not attempting to hint here with a wink and a nudge that it does, that you get in trouble if you say no. We truly don't know. And hey, that's politics for you.
There you go. Cool.
That was fun. It was way more fun than I thought. I thought I'd be very worried through the entire cast that I was going to say something wrong. And I hope that if people are moved to do so, they'll send us email at customerservice@manager-tools.com and tell us what you think of our opinion. Please, if you do decide to write us, remember, this was about the idea of politics discussions at work. We didn't take a particular point of view, and let's not let the heat and vitriol, I can't imagine anybody would be vitriolic to us, but let's not let the stuff that happens in the political discourse in our private lives creep into this discussion.
Yeah. Neither do we spend a lot of time talking about the way it should be, that you should be able to talk about politics without repercussions, right?
This is not fantasy land.
Right.
Okay. It's manager tools. There's no should. If you write to us and tell us what should be, generally we're not going to engage in that. The fact is, for the last 100 plus years, political discussions have been abjured at work for good reason. It's a cultural norm. Cultural norms tend to be well-based in millions of interactions that teach us what works and what doesn't work. And as a general rule, it's good that we have norms as opposed to rules, as opposed to policies, as opposed to laws.
Right. And folks, like, just so you know, like, if you're one of those people who feel strongly about the way you believe and you want to make a difference in the world and you want to discuss politics in your company because you believe you can start changing the world and you're willing to live with the consequence of doing so, then I respect you. People have moved the world and paid great personal sacrifices.
Yeah.
And part of the reasons why they're heroes. But in Manager Tools, our goal is not to share information with you and suggest behavior that puts your career at risk. That would be antithetical to what Manager Tools is all about. Doesn't mean you can't do it. And if you're willing to do it, then God bless you. But we're not going to advise that course of strategy as part of our career advice.
Exactly. Thanks, partner.
Thank you, my friend.
If you've not already, we'd encourage you to register for an account on the Manager Tools website. It's completely free and will give us the ability to speak to you directly about what matters most to you. You'll be signing up for our weekly newsletters and bi-weekly conference announcements, and we'll be on the list to receive notifications about upcoming events in your area. We don't want to overwhelm you with tons of uninteresting information, so help us target our reach out to what matters most to you.
That's it, everybody. Hope you enjoyed it. Come back next week. See you then.